Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Shanna Fold.
And I'm Yochanan El Rom.
In our top story, more than half of the Hamas terrorists have been killed or seriously wounded in Israel's Operation Swords of Iron. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind of the October 7th massacre, had lost touch with his fighters and was on the run, fleeing from one hideout to another as the IDF closes in. The army's next objective is the terrorist stronghold of Rafah. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu believes the Gaza offensive will end in a matter of months, not years. Meanwhile, in the north, tensions remain high along Israel's border with Lebanon. Since October 8th, Hezbollah forces have attacked Israeli communities and IDF positions on a near-daily basis, killing civilians and military personnel. Israel has responded by targeting terror cells in Lebanon and Syria, killing hundreds of Hezbollah operatives. Defense Chief Gallant had a warning for the Iranian proxy army, saying Israeli warplanes are pointed north. He stressed the Air Force has many offensive tools it could employ in Lebanon.
There's been talk of the United States and the United Kingdom unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state. The Axios news service reported that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken asked the State Department to review the options for possibly recognizing a Palestinian state when the war between Israel and Hamas ends. Apparently, some members of the Biden administration believe that establishing a Palestinian state with security guarantees for Israel would lead to lasting peace in the region. Britain's top diplomat has gone one step further. Foreign Secretary David Cameron said his country could sign off on a Palestinian state after a ceasefire in Gaza and before the war ends. Cameron added that recognition of an independent state of Palestine cannot come at the start of the process, but does not have to be at the very end of the process either. Most Israelis believe that the idea of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace, died on October 7th, when bloodthirsty Hamas terrorists launched their genocidal war, slaughtering innocent men, women, and children.
Jewish groups are reacting with outrage after U.S. President Joe Biden signed an executive order imposing sanctions on what the White House calls extremist settlers. Critics say the timing of the action reeks of politics because it was issued as Biden traveled to Michigan, a key swing state in the upcoming presidential election. The state has a large Arab and Muslim population. The law would slap financial sanctions on individuals committing acts of violence in Judea and Samaria. However, critics argue that the executive order could also be applied to sanction political leaders and parties with no direct link to violence, and it could also punish anyone who verbally defends Jews accused of violence. Others claim the Biden administration is making an attempt at creating a moral equivalency between the demonic genocidal acts of Hamas and Jewish attacks. The law only applies to Jews and not Palestinians. Israeli legal scholar Eugene Kantorovich described the order as vague because it does not require that violence occur, and it can be applied to anyone the White House thinks undermines peace and security.
Member of Knesset Shereen Haskell of the National Unity Party says the time has come to do away with the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. The Gaza war exposed UNRWA's incestuous relationship with the Hamas terrorist organization, resulting in numerous nations temporarily halting financial support to the corrupt group. Haskell believes those funds should be permanently withheld. She told Arutz Sheva News that Hamas has taken over the entire human resource department of UNRWA. She said 13,000 UNRWA employees are either members of Hamas or have family members who belong to the terrorist organization. Haskell denounced UNRWA for educating an entire generation of Palestinians to martyrdom and radical Islam. She said UN aid intended for civilians in Gaza is hijacked by Hamas and then sold to Gazans in order to raise funds for the terror group. Meanwhile, UNRWA chief Phillips Lazzarini is scrambling to offset the loss of revenue. He traveled to the oil-rich Muslim Gulf states of Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, urging them to increase their financial support to the corrupt UN agency in order to preserve stability in the region.
The situation for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency is intensifying. Israel's Bank Leumi has informed the scandal-plagued UN organization that it's blocked the UNRWA bank account. Leumi took the action after suspicions arose that UNRWA funds in the bank were being used to pay for terrorist activity in Gaza. Banking officials said they've recently observed a significant amount of irregular activity in UNRWA's account. They claim that large sums of money transferred by UNRWA to the Hamas-run enclave do not allow the bank to trace the source of the funds and the ultimate destination of some of the money. Leumi demanded explanations from UNRWA representatives who thus far have failed to provide answers the bank deems satisfactory.
Argentinian President Javier Milei arrived in Israel and immediately announced he is relocating his country's embassy to Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to praise Milei, calling him a friend of Israel. The Argentine leader was met at Ben Gurion Airport by Foreign Minister Israel Katz, who thanked him for moving the embassy and for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Milei has been an outspoken supporter of the Jewish state in its war against Hamas. This is his first visit to the Holy Land since being elected president of Argentina.
The U.S. state of Georgia has a new anti-Semitism statute on the books. Both the House and Senate overwhelmingly passed the measure. Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed the bill that uses the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism to define Jew hatred. Kemp, who visited Israel for the first time last year, said he was committed to protecting residents of his state from criminal acts, including those based on hate. There has been a troubling rise in anti-Semitic incidents in Georgia and elsewhere in the U.S. following the savage Hamas attack on Israel. In a related matter, 2 Democratic U.S. Congresswomen voted to allow October 7th attackers into the United States. The pair belong to an unofficial group called the Squad and were the lone votes against the No Immigration Benefits for Hamas Terrorists Act. 422 other representatives voted to deny entry into the United States to non-U.S. citizens who are members of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad.
This year's Grammy Awards ceremony paid tribute to the 360 Israelis who were raped and slaughtered by Hamas terrorists at the Supernova Music Festival for Love on October 7th. Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr. eulogized the dead while being accompanied by a string quartet consisting of Israeli and Palestinian musicians. Mason said that terrible day and all the tragic days that have followed have been awful for the world to bear as we mourn the loss of innocent lives. He told the audience that music brings people together like nothing else can. Therefore, music must always be our safe space.
Jerusalem has a new embassy. It's the Indigenous embassy whose mission it is to change the narrative among the nearly 500 million Indigenous people living throughout 90 countries. Embassy co-founder Dr. Shiri Trotter said this is the right time to stand with Israel in its struggle against forces that seek to annihilate it. She stressed that the Jewish people are indigenous to the land of Israel. The embassy has received strong expressions of support from Indigenous leaders around the world, including Singapore, Taiwan, Samoa, Tahiti, New Caledonia, the Solomon Islands, Australia, Papua New Guinea, the Cook Islands, Tonga, Fiji, New Zealand, Native American chiefs in the U.S., and paramount chiefs from Southern Africa. Jerusalem's deputy mayor, Flor Hassan Nahum, said the embassy, located on the Friends of Zion campus, is the 6th to open in Jerusalem after the United States, Guatemala, Honduras, Kosovo, and Papua New Guinea. It is the 100th embassy to open in the State of Israel.
If rain is a blessing from God, then Israel has certainly been blessed this winter. The north and south of the country saw 16 straight days of rainfall in January and February. The last time that happened was more than 30 years ago. And it has been the good kind of rain, or as the Israel Meteorological Service likes to say, a rain of blessing. The steady, persistent downpours have allowed the rainwater to seep into the ground, enriching natural water sources without the damaging side effects of flooding. Parts of the center and the north of the country have already equaled or exceeded their annual average rain. The abundant rainfall has also raised the water level of the Sea of Galilee, Israel's largest freshwater lake.
Israeli fencer Yuval Freilich won the gold medal at the 2024 Qatar Grand Prix. It was an emotional moment when the Israeli national anthem was played as Freilich stood on the podium. Also bringing home the gold was Israeli windsurfer Sharon Cantor, who finished in the top spot at the IQ Foil World Championships off Spain's Lanzarote Island, which is one of the Canary Islands. Cantor will represent Israel at the Paris 2024 Olympic Games this summer. The bronze medal also went on to an Israeli, 23-year-old Katie Spichakov. And finally, Israel's under-20 men's national ice hockey team skated to a gold medal at the World Championship tournament in Bulgaria. The victory was made even sweeter after the International Ice Hockey Federation banned the Blue and Whites' participation, citing security concerns, then reversed its decision a week later following widespread criticism. The Israeli team finished with a perfect record, defeating all 5 of their opponents. The awards ceremony took place on International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Scott Phillips. He's the CEO of Passages. Scott, thank you for being on the show.
It's good to be with you, Josh. Thank you.
Can you tell our viewers a little about what is Passages?
Passages is a movement of emerging generation Christian leaders who are rooted biblically in their faith and who are leading courageously at home and who are standing with Israel and the Jewish people. And we do that through changing their perceptions on Israel, their faith, by bringing them here to Israel, by convening them in community when they get home, both on campus and in our hubs across the country, and also by connecting them to opportunities to take action based on what they've learned.
A lot of people call it here Christian birthright based on the Jewish program that brings Jewish youth here. Do Christians feel a real connection to the land of Israel?
I believe many Christians do, but I think a lot of Christians don't, especially young Christians. They just don't know. I think that maybe with a different generation, there is a lot of connection to Israel. With a younger generation, that's in question, and that's really one of the reasons why Passages started just 8 years ago, and we've taken over 11,000 young people to Israel since.
How important is it to Christians, people's faith, to actually see the Bible come alive, to come here, to see where the stories happen, to see what happened exactly, to see that it's a real book. It's not just a storybook. It actually happened in the land of Israel. How much does that affect people's faith?
It's important to know that it actually happened, but also that the Bible ultimately is this grand narrative from God, right? For Christians to understand that, the New Covenant, the New Testament, Jesus came for a reason. And ultimately, he didn't appear out of nowhere. He appeared here in the land of Israel. And so it's important, I think, for Christians to understand the roots of their faith and the story that ultimately leads to our faith as Christians in Jesus.
There's a lot of misinformation on campuses, things that are just outright lies, saying that Jesus was a Palestinian, for example, but all the way till today where they say, oh, the massacre on October 7th didn't really happen, even though Hamas videoed it, it was altered. A lot of images that come out are not true. What is Passages doing to combat those lies and that narrative?
Well, I think it's important that Christians, are rooted in their faith, because if they are rooted in their faith and they understand the importance of Israel and the Jewish people, it's important for them to also come to Israel because they're able to see it with their own eyes. They're able to see the truth versus what they see in the media or what they hear on campus. And then when they get home, be able to tell that story on campus and beyond.
We're in the middle of a war. We're at a war with Hamas in the south. We're at war with Hezbollah in the north. How safe is it to bring college students to Israel this time?
We believe that it's beginning to be a lot safer to come to Israel and to be able to put together trips for students. Obviously, it may look a little different depending on what's going on, but we think it's important to get young people back here as soon as possible. And that's why we're here in Israel, to be able to start to bring young people back to the land to see what's actually going on.
We see a lot of people involved in politics when it comes to Israel, people of faith. We see it in the Congress, we see it at the Knesset, and the people who are here actually got to meet with some of the Knesset members who are working to build relationships with Christians around the world. Why is it important to take that biblical support for Israel and turn it into real political action?
Because faith means action. We have to translate faith into action. And I think even with faith as the foundation, it's important to build relationships with the Jewish community, between Jews and Christians, to get to know each other on a human level, to get to know the challenges that the Jewish community has in America and here in Israel. And so when we can connect on that human level and build relationships, that creates sustainable and lasting support.
You actually took the group down to the south to see the atrocities of October 7th. What message can the students bring out to the world when they get back home?
Well, I think number one, it's wild to think that people are saying it didn't happen. They're able to go and see it and say, actually, it really did happen, and that Israel is defending itself and doing what it needs to defend itself for the one and only Jewish state in the world.
You know, a lot of people say never again after the Holocaust, but this time it's different for the Jewish people. We have not just a state and an army and our own government, but we also have Christian supporters, millions of them around the world. How significant is that?
I think it's a big difference between the late 30s and where we are now because of Christian support for Israel, but we have to make sure that that continues. And that is a key part of what Passages is and does, is ensuring that the next generation of Christians understand the importance of Israel and are willing to take action.
You know, Jewish people are persecuted around the world. The rise of anti-Semitism cannot be debated. Yet also we're seeing a rise of anti-Christianity. We're seeing that the real genocides in North Africa and the Middle East are not actually against Jews, it's actually against Christians. How much do the students understand that they're also at risk of this anti-Judeo-Christian narrative?
You know, I don't know that it's fully realized that Christians are at risk, but it is an important point because I think both people of the book here, Christians and Jews, I should say Jewish first because the Jews were the first. But really, I see this as a spiritual thing. I think that the world does not like the good law of God, and so many in the world really resist that. And so I think that's why you see hate against Christians and Jews all over the world.
Scott, there are literally tens of millions of people watching a show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
I would say that as Christians, we're here for such a time as this. And we have to make sure that that Christian support for Israel, that friendship with the Jewish community, with the Jewish people worldwide, remains. And so we are here for such a time as this, and we have to take action.
Thank you, Scott, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
There's a concerning web of connections between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the terror group called Hezbollah.
Hezbollah is a proxy army of Iran. Iran trains them, funds them, and influences them on who and when to attack.
But how has this group become so rich and so organized? Let's examine more closely how Iran plays a pivotal role in the formation, financing, and support of Hezbollah, a group that now possesses a dangerous arsenal of advanced guided missiles on Israel's northern border. Hezbollah is a Shiite terrorist organization with a political front based in Lebanon. It emerged in the early 1980s with major financial backing from Iran. At the time, Lebanon's government was mostly run by Christians and Sunni Muslims. Many Shiites in Lebanon claimed their voices were not heard and their needs were ignored. Iran saw the frustration of the Shiite population and preyed on its weakness. The Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps aligned itself with young, radicalized men from poor and run-down parts of Lebanon. The IRGC leaders turned them into extremists who could help Iran extend its influence and ideology across the entire region. Their goal is to revive Islam to a past glory, where the social, political, and personal life of everyone would have to conform to strict Sharia law. The fanatical organization showed its true colors when early Hezbollah operatives carried out the world's first suicide bombings. In 1982, at the beginning of the First Lebanon War, a car rapidly entered Israel's military headquarters in the coastal city of Tyre, Lebanon. Once inside, the driver pressed a button and blew himself up. 91 people were killed. 75 were members of the Israeli security forces, and the rest were Lebanese and Palestinian prisoners. In 1983, Hezbollah terrorists detonated 2 explosive-laden trucks. The first destroyed a 4-story barracks, killing 241 U.S. Marines and sailors. The second rolling bomb exploded in a nearby building, killing 58 French paratroopers who were part of a peacekeeping mission. Suicide bombers were promised that large sums of money would be sent to their families once their deadly missions were completed. The men accepted the deal, and suicide bombings became a widespread global phenomenon. By 1984, the administration of U.S. President Ronald Reagan declared Iran a state sponsor of terrorism. Later administrations sanctioned the radical Shiite country and its leaders. However, none of these actions prevented Iran from providing Hezbollah, its new proxy army, from acquiring advanced training, weaponry, and most importantly, financial support. By 1992, Hezbollah was voted into parliament, giving the terrorist group a new status as a political party. Today, the terror organization is a highly capable force with an estimated 150,000 rockets and advanced guided missiles aimed at Israel. Hezbollah and the IRGC routinely tell the world that their goal is to annihilate all the Jews living in the Holy Land. But the international community pays little attention to those threats. In 2016, Hezbollah's Secretary General, Hassan Nasrallah, admitted the organization's budget came entirely from the Islamic Republic of Iran. It included everything from daily supplies to weapons and rockets. 2 years later, the U.S. Treasury Department estimated that Hezbollah was working with an annual budget of $800 million. By 2020, Hezbollah was declared to be the most heavily armed terrorist organization on the planet. Their weapons are not only numerous, but also technologically advanced, capable of striking targets with precision. Hezbollah's influence extends beyond its home base of Lebanon. It has played a significant role in other conflicts, like the Syrian civil war, where it fought alongside Iranian forces in support of the brutal Assad regime. The bloody conflict has resulted in over 500,000 civilian casualties. But where is the International Criminal Court at The Hague? Where is the impotent United Nations? Where are the tens of thousands of self-righteous demonstrators demanding an end to the carnage in Syria? Hezbollah decided to flex its military muscles following the outbreak of the war in Israel, which started with Hamas's barbaric massacre of Israeli civilians on October 7th. The terror organization has been launching daily barrages of rockets and anti-tank guided missiles at Israeli towns and military positions in the north. The IDF has ordered Israeli civilians living in communities near the border to relocate. As historic events continue to develop in the Middle East, experts everywhere are taking a critical view of the Hezbollah-Iran connection as it directly impacts Israel and this volatile region. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
Shalom, dear friends, here from Jerusalem. I want to approach you today with a complicated subject, and that is, what does the Bible say about war? And also, is Israel committing war crimes today in the Middle East? Of course, many Christians, in particular in the Western world, they are leaning very strong to pacifism. They say Christians should at no point enter into a war situation. And this situation, or this attitude in particular, arose in the dawn of World War II, that saw such horrendous bloodshed all across Europe and even beyond Europe. And Christians came to the conclusion that Christians should have no place in any war whatsoever. However, this is an attitude, of course, that the Western world can afford today, because neither most part of Europe, neither the United States or the North American continent were engaged on their own continent in any warlike situation. And I want to quote here one of our friends and theologian, Jerry McDermott, who wrote in one of the recent essays he did about the war and conflict with Hamas. Hamas in Gaza. He says the following: pacifism is the immoral privilege reserved for those who sit safely at home. And I believe there is a lot of truth to that, because here in Israel we cannot afford being pacifist, because otherwise the state of Israel would not be surviving. Israel needs to have his young men in the army to defend the safety of the nation of Israel, and they could not survive otherwise. And I want to quote a few centuries earlier, one of the church saints, Thomas Aquinas, what his take on war was. And he actually coined an expression that was called a just war. He says in his mind there is something like a just war. He says Christians should avoid, in any case, if possible, any war. But he says there is a just war under three conditions. He says, number one, he says, a just war is a just war when it's not initiated by individuals or by small militias. It needs to come from the king or from the government. And secondly, he says a just war is a war that has a just cause. That means it needs to punish evil and rectify wrong that are carried out. And thirdly, he says a war is a just war when the end of that war will be a more peaceful, a more righteous, a more just situation for the parties of that war. And in a way, I believe this definition can be helpful even applying to this current conflict, because I can assure you that Israel is not engaging this war with any vicious intents, but actually they want to bring forth a more peaceful solution and situation for the communities, not only around Gaza, but also for everybody who is living in Gaza. And I believe there is no doubt today around the world that the regime of Hamas in Gaza, it is an evil regime that defies any respect for human rights or human dignity or human values. And there is a great consensus around the world that they need to disappear from the Gaza communities, and if possible also from other areas in the Middle East. And I want you to pray for Israel in your churches, in your congregation, that they experience that the Lord is mighty in battle on their side, that he is fighting their battles as they are ridding the world of the evil of this wicked terrorist organization. And I wish you God's blessing to that. Shalom from Jerusalem.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Shanna Fold.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.